Good afternoon. Great to be learning with you. Special time, Erev Sukkot. Sukkot begins tonight, and it's a great time, a great day. Literally, this is the festival of our rejoicing. That's actually how it's known. Please God, we should go into it hearing only good news. We really seem to be on the crest, on the cusp of a peace deal. Please God, let it materialize. Let all the hostages come home, whatever condition they may be in. And please God, let as many of them as possible be alive. And let us establish a secure and lasting peace. We say Amen. Let's light up the darkness. I have another reason why today's show is called Great Day that we'll get into as we get into it a little further. Who's in the house? Guy in Ohio, Belle in Texas, Gordo in Scotland, Melissa in Great Neck, Bella in Florida, Lucy in Minnesota. Right, Lucy in Minnesota, and Franco in Trieste, Italy, and Elise in Virginia. Welcome, everybody. Great to have you with us. Going to do a double, but they're short, and it should be even a short class with the double daf. And reached another milestone, the 2100th and 2101th daf of the Daf Yomi cycle. There's 2,711 pages, so, we're at 2,100 and 2,101, about 600 to go. So looking ahead to that Siyum in 2027, I'm very mindful that I have not taught all 2,100 pages. Specifically, I think it was 3 months during production of Guns N' Moses that I was just completely unable to teach. It was not possible during that excruciatingly difficult time. But thank God we had it and we're able to create the movie. That's going to be available October 14th at home everywhere. But I want to make that up so that when we hit the Siyum in June of 2027, we've really done it all. So I'm just thinking, how am I going to do it? At some point, I'm going to start, kind of like some kind of a double schedule where we'll just keep doing the page of the day. And then I'll add another one of those pages. I think it was Tractate Nedarim. Was it Nedarim? I'll have to look, but it was one tractate and a piece of another. And so one idea that I had was, maybe just teach another class, additional, kind of stop the recording and start again, maybe right after or right before our normal time. But I also thought that perhaps for that, maybe do it as a Zoom, which we can, record and then post. And I just wonder, would you guys be interested in joining me for a Zoom so we could actually be face to face? Whoever wants to do it, and then we could have a little bit more of a class discussion as well, not just your comments in writing, but more of a face-to-face class. Maybe we do that once a week. In which case we might have to start pretty soon, because I think it's about 90 pages that we'd have to make up. So if it's once a week, it'd be almost 2 years of it. Or maybe it's like twice a week or 3 times a week, or maybe it's just every day for 3 months at some point. I'd rather not get into that situation if people are into this idea of maybe doing a Zoom class once a week. So at this point, just kind of polling the Hevra, right? Polling our friends. Is that something you guys would be interested in? Let me know in today's comments. And Elon, keep track, of how many people say that's something they would be interested in. Okay, so today we're continuing our discussion of Mishnah number 1 here in chapter 2, Tractate Zevachim, 29th volume of the Talmud. Matters which would disqualify an offering being brought because of some attribute of the Kohen, that he's not dressed properly, he's not wearing the priestly vestments, or he's got too many vestments on. There's an interposition between him and the vestments. He's tameh, he's ritually impure. It turns out that he's disqualified, perhaps because he's the son of a Kohen who married a divorcee, which Kohanim are not permitted to do. Any one of these kinds of matters could disqualify the service that he has brought. And specifically now we've been talking about washing the hands and feet. They would wash from the basin. That's how we're translating it. The word was kior, a special basin. It existed in the first temple period. It was, designed and fashioned by King Solomon. The large basin made of copper. And then I guess it was in the second temple period that this Ben Kativ put spigots into it so that it would be like there was like a faucet coming out of it, and multiple Kohanim could wash their hands and feet at the same time. And then towards the end of yesterday, we were talking about, there's a question that, if a hand and foot washing, sanctification of the hands and feet, is it enough to do it once in the morning and then that's enough for all day long? What if night falls? What if they get distracted? And then this idea that if it's, that hands and feet that they wash today, if they then serve all night, what about tomorrow? They're going to need to do it again. If that applies to their hands and feet, does that also apply to the water itself in the kior, in the basin? And then we learned that Ben Kativ made this mechanism where he would literally lower, there's some kind of a pulleys and chains and whatnot, and they would lower the entire basin into a well beneath the floor level of the Holy Temple. And then it would join other water in that well, so they wouldn't have to spill out the water, but it would be mixed, with the pure water in the well, and then they could bring it up the next day, so they didn't have to neither pour out the water and lose it, nor have it be disqualified by sitting out overnight in the basin. So that's where we were yesterday. We're picking this up near, about 3/4 of the way down, page 20a. And today we'll be doing pages 20 and 21 here in Tractate Zevachim, still discussing Mishnah number 1 in chapter 2. Rabbi Yochanan says, if a priest sanctified his hands and feet, meaning he washed them, in preparation for the removal of the ashes, that's the first thing they do in the morning, removing the ashes from the day before on the Mizbeach, the holy altar, where the animal sacrifices, the portions of them that were burned, that's where they were burned. So in preparation for the removal of the ashes, he sanctified his hands and feet in preparation for the removal of the ashes, which is the first service performed every day in the temple, and it was performed before dawn. Well, then, the next day, i.e. after dawn, he does not have to sanctify them again, as he has already sanctified them at the beginning of the day's service. Now, that's an interesting point, because when we're talking about a day on the calendar, the Hebrew calendar, it always begins the night before. So this squares very well with the Hebrew calendar. Okay, so he washed his feet at the end of the night, but before dawn. It's all part of the same calendar day. I mean, even in the modern calendar, this is well after midnight. And so that prepares him for the day. But he did this in the dark, right before dawn. And yet, so according to Rabbi Yochanan, his hands are now considered sanctified. His hands and feet are sanctified for the upcoming day. So the Gemara asks, in accordance with whose opinion is this statement? If it is in accordance with the opinion of Rebbe, also known as Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, doesn't he say that being left overnight disqualifies sanctification of the hands and feet? If so, one should be required to sanctify them again after dawn. And if it is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon, doesn't he say that if the priest sanctified his hands and feet at the beginning of the service, he does not need to sanctify them again, even if he continues to perform rituals, for the next 10 days? So why then does Rabbi Yochanan state only that one who sanctified his hands and feet before the removal of the ashes is not required to do so again after dawn? And Abaye says actually the statement is in accordance with the opinion of Rebbe, and the disqualification, wait a minute, sorry. I got distracted. Yeah, and the disqualification of sanctification of the hands and feet by being left overnight is by rabbinic law. And although the sages mandate that a priest must sanctify his hands and feet every morning that he's serving in the Holy Temple, they concede that during the period from the rooster's crow, which is before dawn, until morning, being left overnight does not actually disqualify his sanctification. Therefore, one who sanctifies his hands and feet at the rooster's crow may continue to perform rites after dawn. Rava says, actually, the statement is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon. And Rabbi Yochanan saw the statement of Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon, as correct with regard to the beginning of the service, i.e. that a priest may serve during the day on the strength of sanctification performed before dawn. But he did not agree with regard to the end of the service. So Rabbi Yochanan holds that if a priest sanctifies his hands and feet before participating in the day's final rites, he must sanctify them again the next morning. So according to the opinion of Rebbe, one who sanctified his hands and feet before sunrise must do so again afterward. Now the Gemara raised an objection from a Mishna, Tractate Tamid 28b, which describes the daily service. Now, his priestly brethren, the members of the patrilineal family, saw that the priest removed the ashes, descended from the altar with the coal pan in his hands, and they ran and arrived at the basin. They hurried and sanctified their hands and feet with water from the basin, from the kior. Now we're on page 20b. Assuming that these priests had all been serving in the temple through the night, one can ask, well, granted, according to Abaye, who interprets the statement of Rabbi Yochanan in accordance with the opinion of Rebbe, and Rebbe concedes that during the period from the rooster's crow before dawn until morning, being left overnight does not disqualify sanctification, because it's like that pre-dawn time is still part of the coming day. In accordance with whose opinion is this Mishnah? It is in accordance with the opinion of Rebbe, who holds that although they served through the night, the previous day's sanctification was disqualified, and they must sanctify their hands and feet again in the morning, but they may do so before dawn. But according to Rava, who interprets this statement in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon, but who holds that according to Rebbe, during the period from the rooster's crow until morning, being left overnight does disqualify the sanctification, meaning it has to be done again. In accordance with whose opinion is this Mishnah? If it is in accordance with the opinion of Rebbe, then the priest's sanctification described therein is useless, since being left overnight disqualifies it at dawn. And if it is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon, doesn't he say that even if the priest continues to perform rites for the next 10 days, he does not need to sanctify his hands and feet again, as long as he didn't urinate, sleep, or leave the temple during those 10 days? But otherwise, yes, he could keep doing it. So if so, since the priests were serving throughout the night, they should not require sanctification. So the Gemara responds, actually, the Mishnah is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon, and here we are dealing with new priests who did not serve the temple that night. Since they are beginning their service now, of course they have to sanctify their hands and feet. New topic. A dilemma was raised before the sages. What is the law with regard to leaving the temple? Is it effective to disqualify sanctification of the hands and feet such that the priest must sanctify them again when he re-enters the temple? And the Gemara elaborates, if you say that being left overnight does not disqualify it, perhaps that is only because he does not separate from the temple. But when leaving the temple, where the priest separates from the temple, it is possible that the priest becomes distracted from the service. If so, he must sanctify his hands and feet again. Or perhaps, since it is in his power to return to the temple at any point, he does not become distracted, in which case he does not need to sanctify them again. And the Gemara suggests, come in here, a proof from a Baraita. If a priest sanctified his hands and feet, and his hands then became impure, he may immerse them to purify them, and he does not need to sanctify them again. If he sanctified his hands, and they then left the temple, they retain their sanctity. So apparently, leaving the temple does not disqualify sanctification, contrary to what I just told you, which is the halacha. So let's see how we end up where the halacha ended up. The Gemara responds, we do not raise the dilemma with regard to a case where only his hands left the temple. In such a case, he certainly does not need to sanctify them again. He just stuck his hands over the outer edge of the temple. Only his hands left the temple. When we raise the dilemma, it is with regard to a case where his entire body left the temple. Then what is the law? Okay. So the Gemara suggests, come in here, another proof from a Baraita. One whose hands and feet are not washed must sanctify them with a service vessel inside the temple. If he sanctified them with a service vessel outside the temple, or with a non-sacred vessel inside the temple, or if he immersed in cave water and performed the service, his service is disqualified. And the Gemara infers the reason his service is disqualified is that he sanctified his hands and feet with a service vessel outside. But if he sanctified them inside and then left, his service is valid, right? If he sanctified his hands and feet in the holy temple with a service vessel, sounds like he is sanctified, even if he left and came back. That's the inference so far. The Gemara responds, whoa. Perhaps one can say, what are the circumstances of the case where one sanctified them with a service vessel outside? It is a case where he removed only his hands and placed them outside the temple and sanctified them there. Consequently, one can infer only that if he sanctified them inside and then left, i.e. specifically where he removed only his hand and placed it outside, his service is valid. But with regard to a case where his entire body left the temple, you should raise the dilemma, meaning the question has not yet been answered. So Rav Zevid said to Rav Papa, come in here, a proof from another Baraita. In a case where a priest left the boundary of the wall of the temple courtyard, if he left long enough to remain there for a time, he requires immersion. If he left only for a moment, he requires sanctification of the hands and feet. So apparently, one who leaves, even for a brief time, requires sanctification. He doesn't have to immerse in a mikvah his whole body, but he is going to have to wash his hands and feet, even if he left the temple courtyard for a moment. So Rav Papa said to him, here we are dealing with a case where the priest left the temple to cover his legs. That's a euphemism for defecating or to urinate. It is only for this reason that he must sanctify his hands and feet when re-entering the temple. So for sure, if he left to go to the bathroom, he has to re-sanctify his hands and feet. And so the question is, if he left the holy temple and he didn't do that, does he have to sanctify his hands and feet? We haven't answered that yet. So the Gemara challenges, but the Mishna in Tractate Yoma 28a already teaches it explicitly. Anyone who covers his legs, right, defecation, requires immersion afterward. And anyone who urinates requires sanctification of the hands and feet with water from the kior afterward. So the Gemara responds, and the redundancy is not difficult. The Tana teaches the principle, and then he explains it again. So the Gemara suggests, come in here, a proof from the following dispute. With regard to a priest who performs the service of the red heifer, which takes place outside the temple, Rabbi Chia Bar Yosef says, in preparation, he must sanctify his hands and feet with a service vessel inside the temple, as he must before any other service, and afterward he leaves the temple to perform the service of the red heifer. Remember, the red heifer would be slaughtered on the Mount of Olives, opposite the Temple Mount. But the priest who's doing that needs to, as we just learned, sanctify his hands and feet, I think, and immerse in the holy temple, then go there and perform that service. Now, he's going to be rendered tameh by performing the service of slaughtering and burning the red heifer, but we're not addressing that aspect of it right now. So in preparation for that, right, the slaughtering and burning of the red heifer, he sanctifies his hands and feet with a service vessel inside the temple, as he must before any other service, and then he leaves the temple to perform the service. And Rabbi Yochanan says he may sanctify his hands even outside of the temple, and even with a non-sacred vessel, and even with an earthenware bowl. So apparently leaving the temple does not disqualify sanctification of the hands and feet. Right, so the argument being made now is, okay, but it's possible, he doesn't have to, but he can sanctify his hands and feet in the Holy Temple in order to go perform the service of the red heifer, which requires having his hands and feet sanctified. So since he can do that in the Holy Temple and then leave the Holy Temple, must be that the act of leaving the Holy Temple doesn't disqualify the sanctification of the hands and feet, but that's for the purpose of the ritual of slaughtering and burning the red heifer, which is not a sacrificial offering, as we've discussed a bunch of times. Rav Papa said the rite of the red heifer is different, since all of its acts are performed outside the temple, unlike other rites. Therefore, leaving the temple does not disqualify sanctification of the hands and feet with regard to it, but not with regard to the sacrificial offerings. The Gemara asks, if so, why do I require that the priest sanctify his hands and feet at all for the service of the red heifer? And the Gemara responds, the service of the red heifer must be similar to the service of offerings performed inside the temple, at least in this respect, but that doesn't make it a sacrificial offering, and since it has its own unique attributes, we can't learn out the idea that one who sanctified his hands and feet in the Holy Temple before going to do the red heifer, that because his sanctification of hands and feet was not disqualified by leaving the temple, that likewise the sanctification of hands and feet by a priest for the purpose of bringing offerings inside the temple would not be disqualified if he left the temple and then returned. We don't know that. A dilemma was raised before the sages. What is the halacha with regard to a priest who contracts tuma, ritual impurity, during the service? Right? How could that happen? I mean, he could have a seminal emission while he's standing there. He could realize that he's a mitzora while he's standing there. Or it could happen that another priest drops dead, God forbid, just has a heart attack and drops dead, and he helps carry the body away. Now he has tumas mace, right? Corpse tuma. That requires a 7-day purification. So for sure, he can no longer participate in bringing the offerings. But let's see what else is happening here. So what is the law with regard to a priest who contracts tuma during the service? Is this effective to disqualify the sanctification of his hands and feet such that he must sanctify them again when he becomes pure? If you say that leaving the temple does not disqualify sanctification, perhaps this is because the person remains fit to serve. But here, where the person is unfit for service because perhaps he becomes distracted, or perhaps since he will become fit again when he becomes pure, he takes care not to become distracted. Right? Maybe it's a simple case of purification where immersion is all that he needs and doesn't even need to await nightfall. I'm not sure what case that would be, but maybe he can go right back to the service. Maybe it's a kind of very light tuma that all he'd have to do is wash his hands and feet. Does he have to do that? So I don't know. If he can become purified while he's standing in the temple, does the previous sanctification of hands and feet still hold? I'm thinking no, but let's see. The Gemara suggests, come and hear a proof from a Baraita. If a priest sanctified his hands and feet and they became tameh, he may immerse them, right? So he can purify his hands and feet from that tuma, and he does not need to sanctify them again. Right, so interesting that the special washing of his hands and feet at the kior that sanctified his hands and feet for the temple service is one thing, and immersion of his hands to clean them of tuma, it must be a very light tuma that is able to just immerse the hands, is not going to cancel the sanctification of his hands and feet, according to this. The Gemara responds, we do not raise the dilemma with regard to a case where only his hands became impure. When we raise the dilemma, and by the way, interesting, touching a Sefer Torah would render the hands impure, and so maybe that's what it is that's enough just to wash the hands. Let's keep going. The Gemara responds, we do not raise the dilemma with regard to a case where only his hands became impure, when we raise the dilemma in regard to a case where his entire body became impure. So the Gemara challenges, but if his entire body contracted impurity, then let me derive the sanctification is disqualified, since he needs to allow the sun to set in order to become pure after immersing. And he certainly becomes distracted in the interim. Right, there we go. If his whole body becomes impure, he's going to have to immerse in the mikvah. And if you immerse in the mikvah, you're not going to be pure again until the sun sets. It's going to be an extended amount of time. His mind will become distracted from the offerings that he was bringing, and so he's going to have to sanctify his hands and feet again. The Gemara responds, well, the dilemma that we're talking about concerns a case where his body became impure adjacent to sunset, so that he does not need to wait long after immersing and will not become distracted. So the Gemara suggests, come and hear a proof from the following dispute. With regard to the priest who performs the rite of the red heifer, Rabbi Chia, the son of Rabbi Yosef, says he must sanctify his hands and feet with a service vessel inside the temple, and afterward he leaves the temple to perform the service. And Rabbi Yochanan says he must sanctify his hands he may sanctify his hands even outside of the temple, and even with a non-sacred vessel, and even with an earthenware bowl. And in preparation for the rite of the red heifer, we intentionally impart impurity to the priest after he has already sanctified his hands and feet. Why? As we learned in a Mishna, Para 3:7, right, which is the Mishnayos about the red heifer, that they would render the priest who burns the heifer ritually impure and immerse him immediately to remove a misconception from the hearts of the Sadducees by means of a public display of disregard for their ruling. Recall that the Sadducees were another sect within the Jewish community, which sadly gained some power and authority at a certain point in history during the Second Temple period, where they say that they don't submit to the authority of the sages and the oral tradition, which stretches all the way back to Mount Sinai, and that they only submit to laws that are explicitly written in the Torah. And there's a lot to this schism that developed. It wasn't only about the pure rulings and disagreement about rulings with respect to the law. There was definitely politics involved. And ultimately the Sadducees disappeared from Jewish history. They were wrong, and their views did not hold water. But there was a time when we had to be concerned about them, and they were trying to, get one of their guys installed as priests and even as the high priest. And that's why we read on Yom Kippur in the Avoda of the Kohen Gadol that the other priests and sages had to adjure him, and you're going to follow the law as it's been handed down from Moses to Joshua to the elders to the prophets to the judges, all the way up until now, that you have to perform the service a certain way, meaning not according to what the Sadducees want you to do. And so this is one of those other areas where the Sadducees disagreed about how the ritual of the red heifer should be run. And so they publicly showed that we do not hold by the Sadducees by doing this. As the Sadducees would say, only by those for whom the sun set was the heifer ritual performed. The Sadducees believe that it is prohibited for an impure priest to immerse that day to burn the red heifer until after sunset, when the purification process is completed. And the Gemara concludes, since this impurity does not disqualify the sanctification of his hands and feet, learn from it that impurity does not disqualify the sanctification of hands and feet in general. And the Gemara responds, the service of the red heifer is different, as one who immersed that day is not unfit for performing it, unlike any other rite. Likewise, impurity, and how do we know that? They derived that. I mean, there's a long derivation that the sages came to realize that the ritual of the red heifer, which is definitely Doraisa, it's by Torah law, but it has certain nuances that include rabbinic decrees. And so one who immersed that day does not have to await nightfall in order to be fit to slaughter and burn the red heifer, because it's not a sacrificial offering. unlike any other rite. And likewise, impurity does not disqualify the sanctification of hands and feet preceding the service of the heifer. So the Gemara asks, if so, why do I require that the priest sanctifies hands and feet at all for the service of the red heifer? And the Gemara responds, we require that the service of the red heifer be similar to the service of offerings performed inside the temple. A dilemma was raised before the sages. What is the law with regard to a priest who wishes to sanctify his hands and feet by dipping them in the basin, in the kior, rather than let the water run from it onto his hands and feet? Must one say that the priest may not do so, since the merciful one states, and Aaron and his sons shall wash their hands and their feet from it, not in it? Or perhaps the priest may even use water that is still inside it. So Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak said, come and hear a proof from a Baraita. Or if a priest immersed in cave water and performed the service, his service is disqualified, since this is not adequate sanctification of the hands and feet. And from the Baraita, one infers, but if he used water from the kior in a manner similar to cave water, i.e. by immersing his hands, and then he performed the service in the holy temple, then his service is valid. Can you make this inference? Gemara says no. It is possible that immersing one's hands in the basin is also insufficient. Nevertheless, it was necessary for the Baraita to mention cave water, so that you shall not say, if one may immerse his entire body in cave water to purify himself, well, the more so is it not clear that he may sanctify his hands and feet by immersing them in cave water? And the Baraita therefore teaches that despite being fit for immersion of the entire body, cave water is unfit for sanctification of the hands and feet of a priest serving in the temple. So we can't learn out from that wording about cave water that it would be permitted for the priest to immerse his hands in the basin rather than receive water that comes out through one of those spigots. We haven't proved that yet. Where did the law end up on this? A priest may not sanctify his hands and feet in the basin itself or in any other service vessel. He must do so in water running from it. The dilemma was left unresolved in the Gemara, and therefore the Rambam deems the practice prohibited ab initio. After the fact, rites performed are deemed valid so as to avoid the possibility of bringing an unjustified replacement offering. Right, so they shouldn't do that, but if they did do that, then b'di'evet, after the fact, we would accept it. Rabbi Yochanan Bar Yosef says the water in the kior is disqualified by being left out at different times of day for different rites. For rites that are permitting factors for an offering, i.e., that must be performed before the meat of the offering may be eaten, the water is disqualified at sunset, like the permitting factors themselves, which may be performed only during the daylight. For example, if a priest wishes to sprinkle an offering's blood on the altar, he may not sanctify his hands and feet from the basin unless it was sunk into its pit at sunset on the previous day, preventing the water from being disqualified. Similarly, for the burning of the offering's limbs on the altar, which may be performed all night, the water in the basin is disqualified at dawn, like those limbs themselves that can be burned during the night. Rav Chisda says, even for the performance of these permitting factors, the water is disqualified only at dawn, as it is for the burning of the limbs. And Rabbi Yochanan says, once one has sunk the basin into its pit at the end of the day's service, reconnecting the water in the basin to flowing water to prevent it from being disqualified, he may not raise it up again the entire night. The Gemara asks, is this to say that if the basin was not sunk before sunset, and that the water inside it would then be unfit for the night service as well? But doesn't Rabbi Asi say that Rabbi Yochanan says in the name of Ilfa, with regard to a basin, that the priest did not sink in its pit at night? They forgot, or the mechanism didn't work. A priest sanctifies his hands and feet from it for the service of that night, and the next day he does not sanctify from it because that water was disqualified. It's going to need to be refilled. So apparently, for purposes of the night's service, the water in the basin does not get disqualified at sunset, only at dawn. The Gemara responds, what does it mean when it says he may not raise it up again? It means that he may not raise it to sanctify his hands and feet in preparation for the day's service. But the water is fit for sanctification for the night's service. So the Gemara asks, if so, this is the same as the opinion of Rabbi Chia bar Yosef, i.e. that for purposes of the day's service, the water in the basin is disqualified at sunset, and for purposes of the night's service, like burning those limbs, which you can do at night, it is disqualified at dawn. Now we're on page 21b. The Gemara responds, the difference between them is that according to Rabbi Chia bar Yosef, if the water is raised at any point throughout the night, it is disqualified for sanctification prior to the day's services. According to Rabbi Yochanan, the water is not disqualified unless the basin is raised at the break of dawn, but the sages issued a rabbinic decree of sinking the basin into its pit all night ab initio so that it would not be raised at dawn accidentally. The Gemara asks, does Rabbi Yochanan really hold that the basin must be sunk all night? But doesn't Rabbi Yochanan say if a priest sanctified his hands and feet in preparation for the removal of the ashes before dawn, then the next day he does not need to sanctify them again, as he already sanctified them at the beginning of the day's service. So evidently the basin must have been raised at least before dawn. So the Gemara elaborates, granted, according to Rava, who interprets this statement in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon, that sanctification of the hands and feet is not disqualified just by virtue of being overnight. This statement that the basin must be sunk all night is in accordance with the opinion of Rebbe, who holds that sanctification of the hands and feet is disqualified at dawn, has to be done again. Accordingly, he holds that the water in the basin is disqualified like the sanctification of the hands and feet is disqualified. It has to be done again for the new day. But according to Abaye, who interprets this statement in accordance with the opinion of Rebbe, the first statement of Rebbe is difficult to reconcile with this other statement of Rebbe. What is different there, that one must sink the basin all night, and what is different here with regard to sanctification prior to the removal of the ashes, that one does not need to sink it? In other words, refresh it. So the Gemara responds, there is no contradiction. Prior to removal of the ashes, one raises the basin and then sinks it again so that it will not remain raised at dawn and render the water disqualified. And the Gemara asks, if so, why does Rabbi Yochanan say that the priest does not sanctify his hands and feet again the next day? If the water has not been disqualified, why would the priest need to avoid sanctifying his hands and feet with it? And the Gemara responds, Rabbi Yochanan means to say that he does not need to sanctify them again for service on the same day, not that he is prohibited from doing so. He can wash his hands and feet again. He's not saying a bracha when he does that, apparently. So even if it's unnecessary, he's permitting to do it. Right, we don't want to say an unnecessary bracha, but I don't think they're saying a bracha when they're sanctifying their hands and feet. So the Gemara asks, is this to say that according to Rabbi Yochanan, if one raised the basin at night and sank it again before dawn, it remains fit for sanctification prior to performing the offerings, permitting factors that day? If so, Rabbi Yochanan's opinion is the same as that of Rav Chisda. So the Gemara responds, the difference between them is that, according to Rav Chisda, there is no mitzvah, there's no commandment to sink the basin into its pit throughout the night, whereas Rabbi Yochanan holds that there is a mitzvah, it's a commandment to sink the basin into its pit all night, ab initio. So the Gemara raises an objection to the opinion of Rav Chisda from a Mishna, Talmud 28a. The priest would not see the priest performing the removal of the ashes, nor would they hear his voice. Rather, right, this is the priest serving in the temple. There's one of them who's out there, right, in the early pre-dawn darkness, removing the ashes. When do the rest of the priests start their day? Rather, they were unaware of his actions until they would hear the sound of the wood with which Ben Katan made a mechanism for sinking the basin into the water during the night. And when they heard the sound of this mechanism, they would say to each other, the time for sanctifying hands and feet from the basin has come. And so the Gemara asks, what is it not that they heard the mechanism raising the basin? So apparently the mechanism would sink it during the night, in contradiction of Rav Chisda, who holds that there was no need to sink it overnight, right? So now you're getting a nice insight into what it was like for the 1 week at a time that these priests would serve in the Holy Temple twice during the year. And then they would all come and serve during Pesach because they were all needed, all hands on deck. But normally, right, there were 24 watches of priests, meaning, patrilineal families of priests, and a group of them would serve, twice a year for a week at a time. And when they were serving, they were sleeping in the temple. And when would their day begin? Apparently, their alarm clock, so to speak, was hearing this mechanism raising the kior out of its well. And I just in passing, I'll mention that reminded me of my college days when I used to not mention this kind of thing, but I feel like it's no longer bragging at all. It's more a mark of shame. But I went to Harvard, and I was on the rowing team. And so at the end of the school year, which was the racing season, was in the spring. And so we would go to this special facility in Connecticut called Red Top, where we would train for 1 to 2 weeks, twice a day, and sometimes more than twice a day, specifically for one race, the Harvard-Yale race. They would train a little bit up the Thames River at their facility called, I think, Yale's Ferry. And our coach at that time was a legendary coach, Harry Parker. He ended up coaching the Harvard crew team to tremendous success, many national championships. And he was the coach for over 50 years, one of the most successful college coaches of all time in any sport. And he was a real character, incredible weather-beaten, weather-lined face from riding in his launch on the river every day, hours at a time, coaching crews for decades. And so when we were at Red Top, we would be woken up at dawn or before dawn, I think. And we were rowing hard twice a day, eating a lot of food, and we were always exhausted. And so we would always hear his big, Timberland boots come stomping into our dorms, boom, boom, boom. Great day! I'll never forget those words. Harry Parker, the stomping and the great day. So all my life I associate, getting up maybe earlier than you'd like, earlier than you'd expect, but because you have a mission, so the first words you should hear on that day is great day. In Harry's words. Okay, just a little episode from my past. Okay, but that's how the priests woke up in the Holy Temple when, this mechanism lifting up the basin from its well so that they need to go rush and sanctify their hands and feet. The time for sanctifying hands and feet from the basin has come, was their version of great day. So the Gemara asks, what is it not that they heard the mechanism raising the basin? So apparently the mechanism would sink it during the night, in contradiction to the opinion of Rav Chisda, who holds that there was no need to sink it overnight. And the Gemara responds, no. And before I explain the objection, I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in now. No, says the Gemara. They heard the mechanism sinking the basin, which had been raised all night. So the Gemara asks, if the mechanism was sinking it, would its sound be audible? No mechanism is necessary to lower the basin. It can simply be lowered with a chain. And the Gemara responds, the priest would still sink it by using a wheel, which would make a sound. So the Gemara represents another version of the answer. The priest would deliberately sink it by its wheel so that its sound would be audible and the other priests would hear and come to begin the service. So the Gemara asks, but wasn't there Gavini the crier who would notify the priests of the beginning of the service? And the Gemara responds, they would make two conspicuous markers for the beginning of the service, the sound of the wheel and the crier, for the guys who didn't wake up from the sound of the wheel, presumably. Two conspicuous markers for the beginning of the service, the sound of the wheel and the crier. Anyone who heard from this marker would come, and anyone who heard from that marker would come. That's what I've got for us today. No comments? No comments, no questions. So I'll just mention two things. One is that our next class will not be Tuesday or Wednesday because of Sukkot. So we'll resume again on Thursday at the regular Thursday time, 6 p.m. Pacific. Also an answer for Sharon, who asked yesterday that today in modern times, when the Kohanim, the descendants of Aaron, stand in front of the congregation to bless the congregation on holidays, and in Israel they do it every day, and that's called duchening, right? The Kohanim stand in front of the room, they have a tallis over their faces, we have our tallises, our prayer shawls over our heads, and they bless the congregation. Before they do that, the Levium, and I'm one of them, so we, the Levium, wash the hands of the Kohanim. So where's that from? We see that the Kohanim, when they served in the temple, did not have Levium washing their hands or feet for them. They washed their own hands and feet at the Kior. So why is it that today the Levium wash their hands for them? And so I don't know when it started, but spiritually speaking, it is an echo just to the more service role that the Levium played in the Holy Temple. We were the musicians, we were the choir, and we had a bunch of other helper roles, just kind of like doing whatever the Kohanim needed. I'm sure it was quite specific and specified, but there were definitely Levium serving in the Holy Temple, not only for the music, but in lots of other capacities as well. And this is an echo of that. And this is, these are the only, we are the only tribe that knows which tribe we belong to. The Kohanim were a part of the Levite tribe, and Levium are the descendants of Levi. All other Jews are called Jews after the tribe of Yehuda. Yehuda. I'm sorry. How do you say that in English? Judea. Or Judah. I'm sorry, Judah. Judea is named after Judah. So we're called Jews after Judah, but that doesn't mean we're all descendants of Judah. Certainly some are descended from Benjamin. And there may be Ephraimites and Menashites as well. Unclear whether Jews are descended from the other 10 tribes, right? Those are known as the lost tribes after the northern kingdom went into its exile at the hands of the Assyrians and Sennacherib. But a Jew who's not a Levite is known as a Yisrael, right? One of the children of Israel, because he doesn't really know what tribe he's a member of. He might, like I said, it might not be Judah. So there you go. So just as an echo from how it was in the past, the Levites now wash the hands of the Kohanim, but it's not because we wash their hands in the Holy Temple. Okay, that's what I've got for us today, and with God's help, we will hear only good news today. Please God, may the hostages get returned today or in these days of Sukkot, but as soon as possible, please. And it should be an uplifting and, just full-throated joy. That's what we want out of Sukkot. We're going to be eating in our sukkah. Some people will even sleep in them. Spiritually, we might be mindful of the idea that whatever we learned about ourselves and making that personal accounting in Elul, and especially in the days of awe, Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur, and we resolve how we're going to do better. Some things we're going to repeat because we did well. Other things we're going to improve in the new year, and how we're going to do that. So these resolutions and organizing plans that we have, to be better, more upright people in the coming year, those resolutions are very fragile. Right? And the sukkah can represent that fragile new you, those fragile new plans. And so as we dwell in these fragile huts, that could blow away in a strong wind, rather than dwelling in our, God willing, strong houses that would stand up to any kind of wind, let us hope that with God's help, we can turn that fragile new us, into a more permanent us, a more upright person, a strong person, who turns to our Father in heaven for help and feels that strength coursing through our bodies, which are the vessels that carry us in this world. Right? We are souls. We have bodies, and so may our souls prevail whenever there's conflict with the body, because the body is pulling us in the direction of just indulging our base desires, the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination. May we succeed in that, that battle to become better people this year. And let us say Amen. And Chag Sameach.